Clyde heard from his third sister, Victoria, after several months of waiting. He visited her shared home with many other strangers. He felt sad that she and Jacob did not have the money to live on their own. Clyde started a fire to keep his pregnant sister warm because she was shivering. Victoria offered for Clyde to feel her belly because her baby was kicking. Clyde happily accepted and joked that the baby kicked because they heard their uncle's voice. He was not able to meet his niece as she was out with Jacob, but it was so great to see his sister. Clyde explains the unbelievable events of what happened with their father. Victoria felt bad for her baby brother, but was also angry that Clyde did not hit their father back. She said that if anyone deserved a right beating, it was that man. Clyde left Victoria's home and felt such relief that he still had a relationship with all three of his sisters. Philip was unfortunately out of town preaching the word of God on the day of Clyde's 18th birthday. Clyde was a little disappointed that he was celebrating his birthday alone, but still baked a cake for himself to celebrate the occasion. Clyde blew out his birthday candles and wished for God to continue to show him signs of how to fulfill his duty as his faithful follower. Clyde's young adult trait is that he is stoic. After the trauma he experienced with his father, he doesn't want to show people his real emotions. Clyde's faith only grew stronger after he aged into a young adult. He was now legally a grown man, and that came with bigger responsibilities in his church, so he read the holy book often to stay sharp and the sacred text. Clyde's one vice was smoking cigarettes. The habit began when Clyde was still on the farm, but it made him feel relaxed and more himself, so he continued to smoke even after he moved in with Philip. He began to attend study group at their church that he went to several nights a week. Philip had not felt like himself in the weeks after his travels. He spread the word of God to many neighboring towns, but he fears he must have caught an illness while doing so. Unbeknownst to poor Philip, he did catch something while traveling, and it would prove fatal to him in the coming weeks. Philip prayed to the God that he has been faithfully following since he was a small child to cure him of whatever illness he had. He was not finished teaching Clyde all of the knowledge he had and did not want the younger man to be alone once again. Clyde started to notice Philip's health steadily decline after a few weeks of him being home. Philip had insisted he was okay, but asked Clyde to lead church services so he could rest. Clyde was beginning to worry for his dear friend and colleague. What would he do without the man's guidance? The members of Philip and Clyde's congregation filed into the church for Sunday service. Clyde's sisters and their husbands also joined the church to show support for his passion. Their faith had also grown since listening to their brother's sermons. One service became a prayer circle for their sick leader of the church. Everybody in the congregation was worried sick about Philip. Since Philip had been too weak to get out of bed most mornings, Clyde took over as the pastor of the church during his absence. Clyde hoped and prayed for his friend and mentor to get better, but he loved being able to preach the sermons. One day, a beautiful young woman came with her husband to Sunday service. He couldn't stop looking at her during his sermon because she looked so unbelievably sad. He sat down next to her after the service to ask her what was wrong. Her husband was too busy flirting with other women to notice his wife. The woman, he now knows his name to Emily Booker, confides in her pastor about the unfortunate events of 2 weeks ago. She was out at the market and her husband, Lewis, snuck home a woman to seduce while she was gone. Their marriage was not one, as she had agreed to. Her father was an angry man who only wanted money. He sold her off to be with yet another angry man. Lewis liked to get drunk and hit her. Emily had come to terms with the abuse, but until then, he was faithful. She had come home early from the market to make her husband dinner. The last thing that Emily expected to walk into her home that day was her husband sleeping with someone that wasn't her in the bed they shared together. In that moment, she realized that any once of feeling she shared for Lewis was gone. She was destined to live a loveless life with a terrible man. She felt so many emotions, despair and anguish, but also an anger she had never felt before. Her life was so unfair. Clyde listened to her story intently, feeling every emotion that Emily was feeling in that moment. He could see so much of his sisters in this woman and knew how they felt to be sold to a stranger. His sisters got a happy ending, but Emily did not. He wanted to do everything in his power to help Emily. It was now his duty as the interim pastor, but it was more than that. He felt this fierce urge to protect her even though he only just met her. He couldn't explain it, but his heart yearned. Clyde explained that there was an opening in their church for a pianist. Since he was no longer able to, Emily had played for years as a child and accepted this opportunity, eager to be away from her home more. Clyde comforts Emily, a stranger who was quickly becoming a friend. He told her that he knew in his heart that God was going to make life better for her, and that he would show her what her calling in Faye was, just like he did with Clyde. As Emily left the church with her husband, Clyde felt something that he had never felt before: lust. After everyone had filed out of the church, Clyde sat in the front pew and prayed. He prayed for the usual things at first, like the health and happiness of his family. For the first time, he prayed for Emily Booker and her health and happiness, maybe with him someday. Every evening after Clyde came home from the church, he cooked supper for Philip. His mentor's health was quickly declining from the mysterious illness that he contracted while on the road. Philip spent the majority of his time now sleeping. His body was failing him, and he did not have the energy to keep his eyes open. Clyde helped where he could, often leaving the food he prepared on the table for him to eat when he woke up, on the off chance that Philip had enough energy to keep his eyes open. He cried and prayed to God to heal him from this illness, or he read the holy book to help him feel closer to his faith. Clyde prayed much more often during the weeks of Philip's illness. He prayed for his friend to get better, but he was starting to lose faith in that. He also prayed for a way to get closer to Emily. His prayers were answered when Emily requested having someone to practice playing the piano with. She always loved the sound of the violin. Clyde knew little about the instrument, but practiced day and night for weeks to get closer to Emily. In the final night of his life, Philip felt a burst of energy and rushed outside to dance in the rain. He used to love doing this as a child. His mother would dance with him, and he would giggle so much. That was the one thing he was looking forward to on the other side, hugging his mother again. Later that same night, Philip passed away in the arms of the closest person to a son he would ever have. His last breath was used to beg Clyde to take good care of his church. Clyde held his mentor's lifeless body in pure shock and despair. Clyde did not know what he would do without his closest friend. He still had so much to teach him, and so much wisdom to give to him. He was the father figure he had always wanted, and he was crushed to lose him so soon. Soon after Philip's passing, he saw his will on the table. Philip had left everything to Clyde: his house, his church, and all of his assets. As grateful as he was for these things, he would rather have his friend back. Clyde shared the news of Philip's passing with the members of their congregation. 8 were devastated to hear the news. Clyde held a funeral for his mentor and delivered his eulogy. There was not a dry in the church. Philip Graves would be missed beyond belief. Philip's home began to feel so lonely and large without him in it. Clyde would often go into Philip's old bedroom and smoke his sadness away. He would talk to him and wished he would speak back, but sadly, he never did. As the weeks turned into months, The loss of his greatest friend became more and more unbearable to cope with. He was strong for the members of his congregation, but would often return home and cry in his bedroom. He tried to distract himself from the sadness by cleaning the home. Philip always liked a tidy house, and Clyde would do that one small thing to honor his lost friend. Some days the cleaning was not enough to subside the sadness and loneliness, so Clyde would pour himself a glass of wine. He wasn't much of a drinker because of how his father depended on alcohol, but a single glass would soothe his woes. The church returned to its usual place of comfort and happiness about a year after the passing of the gracious leader. The members of the congregation mourned the loss of Philip alongside Clyde, but after a while, the rest moved on from feeling sad, all except for Clyde. Clyde's only saving grace during this time of sadness was being able to speak to Emily before and after Sunday service. Clyde had been to Forlorn to practice the violin, so he and Emily had not been able to play their instruments together yet. After Sunday service one day, Emily asked if he could speak to Clyde in the confessional. Emily disclosed that she had been having thoughts of ending it all. She knew it was a mortal sin, but she was so unhappy in her marriage and with her life. Clyde thanked her for being so open and vulnerable with him, and he would do everything in his power to give her a reason to live. That day, he invited Emily over to his home so they could play their instruments together. He knew music brought Emily such joy, and the only thing he wanted was to see a smile on her face. During this encounter, he found himself also smiling more than he had in the past year and feeling pure joy from Emily's presence. She had a sharp tongue which took him completely off guard, but he enjoyed learning new things about her. After talking to one another for several hours, they finally decided to make beautiful music together. Clyde was an amateur at best with the violin, but Emily's ability to play the piano was truly breathtaking against his better judgment and every single value he held in high regard. He found himself falling in love with Emily. As the months went by, the world began to fill with light again for Clyde. Emily was that light. God works in mysterious ways, but he realized that Emily was supposed to be in his life forever. Whether that was simply being her friend, having her be the church's pianist, or something more. They worked so well together. Sunday services had never gone so well. Not even with Philip. Emily brought such beautiful music to the church, and Clyde's sermons only got better with having Emily next to him. He did not know when the exact moment was when they began to flirty banter, but Clyde very much enjoyed complimenting such a beautiful woman and being complimented in return. He had to pray longer every day though because he was sinning. His vows to God were extremely important to him. The Holy Book was the only reason he was able to escape from his father, and he owed everything to God and the church. However, he could not stop himself from getting closer to Emily. She had a gravitational pull on him that felt so natural. He felt such peace when he was around her. He was in love with her, and that scared him. He did not know whether or not Emily was in love with him too, but he did not want to know because it would hurt too much. He could never break his vow to God, nor could he ever allow Emily to damn herself by committing adultery. Maybe over time Clyde could become okay with only being in Emily's life as a friend. Maybe stolen glances, lingering touches, and making gorgeous music together would eventually be enough for him. It had to be if he wanted to get into heaven. Everything he had previously thought would be enough for him became moot when Emily embraced him. He had never felt such pleasure from a simple touch before, and he wanted so much more. Clyde poured himself a glass of wine to keep those unholy thoughts at bay, but Emily asked for a glass as well. This was uncharted territory for Clyde, and he suddenly felt self-conscious and nervous around the stunning woman. The wine did wonders to calm his thoughts, but it also allowed him to feel more comfortable and loose-lipped. He could not stop himself from continuously sharing his most inner thoughts with Emily about how he felt about her. He felt such a strong desire for her deep inside him that wanted to be free. The evening came to a head when Clyde kissed Emily for the first time. It was an impulsive act and Clyde's first kiss ever, but it was the greatest moment in his life thus far. Emily was receptive to the kiss, but she panicked after Clyde's lips left hers. She had just committed adultery, and she was no better than her husband. She left Clyde's home in a hurry and ran home. Emily and Lewis did not attend Sunday service in the following weeks, nor did Emily show up for their standing Thursday evening time to play music together. Clyde had never felt more crushed and disappointed not to see her playing the piano during service, or watching him in a pew. Clyde wrote letters to Emily and poured everything he was feeling out onto the page. He knew he should not be in love with her, but he could not stop it. Loving her was as easy and natural as breathing for him. He could never send the letters in fear of her husband retrieving them first. Clyde fell into a deep depression after 3 weeks of not seeing Emily. He was heartbroken that Emily could never love him, and he kicked himself for being so naive and thinking he could ever be with a married woman. He also felt like a terrible follower of God. His faith had been faltering for weeks because it did not feel that he deserved God's love and forgiveness for what he did. After 6 weeks of not seeing Emily, he stopped feeling sorry for himself and picked himself back up. He read the holy book from cover to cover again, and began to feel closer to his faith again. He still thought of Emily every second of the day and hoped she was okay and happy, but he had come to terms that their great romance would never come to fruition. Clyde played the violin after yet another Thursday, without Emily showing up to practice at instruments together. He was getting more proficient in the skill because of all the practicing he had done with Emily. However, he found that the music sounded dull and emotionless without Emily's powerful and elegant piano strokes to accompany him. They complemented one another in every possible way. Emily appeared in the church after Sunday service had already concluded. She asked if he could listen to her confessional. Clyde was hesitant due to his feelings to her, but he had an obligation as this church's pastor, so he agreed. Emily eloquently explains the events of 2 months ago to Clyde, as if he was not an active participant. What shocked Clyde was her retelling of the events. She spoke so highly of Clyde and told him that while everything else in her life was an anchor, he was her lifeline who brought back to life. She concluded her confessional by telling Clyde that she was in love with him. That no matter the consequences, she wanted to be with him forever. Clyde was taken aback by her words but told her exactly how much he loved her back. After this revelation, the two lovebirds moved from the partition and on to a pew in a heated moment of passion and love. This was the very moment that Clyde had dreamed about since the moment he locked eyes with Emily. Dukkha. Emily and Clyde made love for the first time together on a pew in the empty church. Every instinct in Clyde's body knew that he should not indulge in this mortal sin, and in their place of worship, that his heart told him that this woman was the love of his life. Clyde went home that evening and replayed the afternoon with his beautiful Emily. He felt immense shame and guilt because he and Emily were both now going to hell. If he would one day be able to marry Emily, eternal damnation of his soul was worth it. That's how much he loved her. Clyde wrote to his sisters and wrote to his stepmother, Summer. He had to share the good news that his heart was now spoken for. He did not share that she was married nor of their rendezvous. He simply wrote how he felt about Emily in his heart. After a few days of pondering what to do, Emily arrived at Clyde's home. She had news to share with him. She came to Clyde's home to tell him that she wanted to be with him, not her husband. She would tell Lewis that evening that she was leaving him. She did not know how she and Clyde would be together, but she would do anything in her power to make it happen. Clyde could not believe the words that Emily was saying to him. A million different scenarios flooded his mind for how they could possibly be together, and all scenarios came to one conclusion. They would not stay in Hen for Don Bagley, and would have to run away. Emily returned home that night to her horrible husband with a newfound confidence. He tries to greet her with a kiss, but she musters enough courage to push him away from her and blurts out that she is leaving him and moving far away so she can be happy with another. Lewis begs his wife to stay with him, showing sadness and remorse for the first time in their marriage. However, when she firmly stood her ground, Lewis began to get angry. He told her that she was legally his property and she could never escape him. Emily became extremely calm and collected. She told her husband that she was leaving whether he liked it or not, and if he wanted her to stay then he would have to make sure she was no longer breathing. He could be with one of his many whores and she could be with the love of her life. Lewis struck his wife. He told her that he was not going to end her life, but if he ever found out who she was leaving him for or where they ran off to, he would hunt them down and they would be very sorry.